started today. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar being put on by the Southern District of ITE's Workforce Development Team. My name's Todd Brooks, and I'll serve as the moderator for today's webinar. Let me cover a few of those obligatory housekeeping announcements before I introduce today's webinar and our speaker. Today's presentation is being recorded for later viewing, as you may have heard from the prompt there from Zoom. Your microphones are going to be on mute unless I take you off of mute for Q&A, which may happen. Our speaker will take questions during the presentation, and if possible, I'll bring you off or ask you to come off mute and maybe restate your question live, just so we'll have that interaction. But you may be limited by my moderating skills, and we'll work through that. If you have questions during the presentation, just drop them in the Q&A feature, and I'll keep an eye on those, and we'll get to those as soon as we can. We will be offering PDHs today for the webinar. We did get that worked out. For those of you who've been on past webinars, we didn't quite have all that worked out. We do today. We'll put some stuff in the chat. We should be able to just report from what we have, people that were pre-registered and that use that information to report that. But just to be sure, I will put my email address in the chat, and perhaps Demetris, the co-chairs of the Workforce Development Team, and y'all can send us an email too to remind us that you'd like PDHs, and we'll see that gets handled after the webinar. There will be a delay. The reporting system that we're using is undergoing an upgrade, and so there may be about a week or so before we can actually get the information entered into that system, just to let you know. And we appreciate your suggestions and feedback for future webinars, and we'll be planning several other ones during 2026. Just tell you to keep an eye out in the Southern District connector for those announcements as they upcome. And so now I'd like to introduce today's presentation speaker. The topic for today's webinar is entitled Preparing the Transportation Workforce for AI-Driven Transformation, Practical Strategies for Readiness, Adoption, and Skill Development. Our speaker today is Jessica Sirke Bishop. She's a change management specialist at KCI Technologies. Jessica is a scholar practitioner specializing in organizational change, performance improvement, and scenario planning. Her work sits at the intersection of enterprise transformation, facilitation, and futures thinking, with a particular emphasis on readiness for AI adoption and decision-making under uncertainty. Jessica brings deep experience leading complex ERP, governance, and organizational redesign initiatives alongside applied research and published scholarship in scenario planning and organizational readiness. Jessica, we thank you so much for presenting to us today. I'll now turn the webinar over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate the opportunity to discuss the human side of the transportation sector, workforce development, psychology, behavioral science. Thank you so much for inviting me. So we'll start off just with a high-level agenda, but as Todd mentioned, if we find a rabbit hole that we want to go down together, we will get weird, we will drop these slides, and we'll rely on Todd's moderator skills. But alternatively, this is the path and the content that we have for today. We'll touch on why we're here, what is the state of the union when it comes to AI and in our sector. How do you assess organizational readiness for AI adoption? How is AI affecting our workforce currently? And if your agency is on the verge of increasing readiness or preparedness for AI, what are some practical models you can use to do that, and ways that you can communicate it? So starting off with the why we're here, it hardly needs to be addressed. I mean, if we were playing a game where every time AI was mentioned in the news, we had to do something, for the last few years, artificial intelligence has been a dominant force in the news and in the media. And that just seems to be increasing more and more. And actually, for anybody who's following the 56th World Economic Forum going on in Davos, most of the people who are there are reporting on the dominance of AI as a subject, based on its potential impacts both for infrastructure and just for society. But when it comes to AI impacts for our sector, there's obviously some really exciting possibilities in the realm of potential safety improvements and in planning and intelligent infrastructure. And I was actually hoping that at a few points during this presentation, I could get a read for people's awareness or engagement with a show of Zoom cartoon hands. So I'm very curious if people are able to raise their hand just to indicate how many of you are familiar with digital twins as a concept. Okay. All right, so yeah, it looks like several people are familiar with it. So one of the amazing potentialities that AI offers us is in this realm of planning where you can create a digital twin for a roadway system, for a factory, for a human, and you can simulate a multitude of different scenarios to see what would happen if Peachtree City doubles in size, or if an airport is built right here. What could that do to capacity or traffic? So in terms of intelligent infrastructure and planning, there's some really cool opportunities that AI presents. And then, of course, another reason that it's relevant for our sector right now is just some of the efficiencies that it offers in day-to-day automation of high volume tasks. So there's a lot of reasons that it's relevant right now. So now we'll dig into where is our sector with it? What is the state of the union? Who are some of the early birds and maybe some of the early worms? And very recently, the United States DOT published an AI use case strategic alignment report for 2026 and 2027. And that's where most of these use cases came out of. And of course, given our recent winter storm, one of the really interesting ones is that AI's capabilities in terms of synthesizing massive data sets in very short periods of time. There's some really interesting research going on using the ability to combine both roadway data and weather forecast data to help facilitate real-time decisions about, planning for winter weather. And I know that the last example is in the Southeast using AI for public sentiment analysis. I believe that research is coming out of the University of Tennessee, so we might have some people on the call who are involved with that. And then Kevin, I'm going to pick on you because we're colleagues and friends. Curious if you're familiar with any of these use cases that came out of the US DOT report.
Yeah, we've seen and heard of a lot of these types of applications before. I mentioned a few of them in a presentation I did a little over a year ago. There were some projects up in Washington State where they're using AI to kind of help with some crash analysis. I was using some analysis or some AI to look at some predictive analysis on crashes and traffic information in Chattanooga while I was there. So these are active things that are going on currently. Utilizing good data as it comes in and information about the other systems that we have access to.
Great, thank you. And so even though these are some really exciting use cases that are what's going on right now, the reality is that each sector faces its own unique challenges, and our sector has some unique challenges. One of those is that even though the transportation sector is extremely data rich, maybe more than maybe more than the other sectors, it's just a reality that a lot of that data is contained in legacy systems, really older systems that make integration and cleanup and organization and continuous improvement of data a little bit of a challenge. Change management is a challenge for our sector. The reality is, there's an old saying: people would rather the devil they know than the devil they don't. No matter what the change is, there's in every sector, there's a tremendous amount of people who would rather stick with a system or a tool that they can't stand. They would rather stay there than have to learn a new tool. So change management can be a real challenge, and just resistance to change in general. Our sector is also facing regulatory challenges when it comes to AI readiness because it's all over the place. A lot of, government, whether it's at the local or state level, or, the policies are in development or in flux, or there aren't any at the moment. And our sector is very driven by regulatory environment. So the driver to move forward with adoption when the regulations aren't there can be a challenge. But of course, today we're here to talk about workforce readiness when it comes to AI. So one of the challenges that we face when it comes to workforce is that, our sector competes with the private sector for technical talent. And that is no easy thing to overcome. And additionally, AI is almost exacerbating that as a challenge. Most of us are familiar with the heuristic that technology in general gets smaller and faster and cheaper at a somewhat predictable rate, while AI has thwarted those norms. And the reality is that right now the functions that AI is capable of, those are growing so rapidly that the gap between technology acceleration and workforce capability specific to artificial intelligence, it's getting wider and wider and wider. And that trend is not going to reverse. So that challenge for our sector is one that we have to figure out how to address. And these are just some examples from another report about jobs that are being created as a result of AI in our sector and some of the skills that are needed for that. And you can just imagine how much skills like cybersecurity has evolved in the last 2 years as a result of AI. So we've touched on state of the union, where is AI adoption, and our sector is just starting to dip our toe into the water, and some of the first research studies are being taken on, and progressive agencies are looking into it. But if you work somewhere that is thinking about making those first moves, how can you assess your organization's readiness for taking this on? And when it comes to readiness frameworks, my friend Kevin assured me that this framework would be at least somewhat familiar because the structure of it is very similar to other models, maybe even the TISMO model that Kevin has showed you in the past. So hopefully it's intuitive. Research on more qualitative human-centric research on AI readiness that's more cultural and workforce nature as opposed to technological is just emerging. This readiness framework has been adapted from some research that's coming out of different European countries. I'll provide a link to that and the resources at the end of the presentation. But you can see that it's got the dimensions across the top, and then across each of these dimensions, there's 4 levels of readiness. And one thing, again, just to acknowledge it because it's a reality, is that this readiness framework is internally focused. It does not take into account external drivers that can have an impact on readiness, like we already touched on, the regulatory environment. So keeping in mind that this framework is internally focused only, you can use this tool or another similar tool that's like this just to have those initial qualitative discussions among departments in an organization. Where are we with technology? Most of us work for organizations that have adopted some major platform, whether it's Microsoft or Google Workspace or SAP or Oracle or any of these big brands. These companies have doubled down on AI solutions and agentic solutions that they're making available, in some cases free or very inexpensively. So where is your organization with technology? We touched a little bit on data quality, figuring out what your data looks like. And of course, the quality and completeness of data within an organization can be drastically different from one group to the next. So looking at that comprehensively. We'll spend most of the rest of the presentation talking about workforce capacity, but where you land on that, of course, finance, governance, security, and privacy, having the conversation and coming to an alignment around where your organization is across each of these dimensions is the first step. And if you were to choose to move forward with an exercise like this and doing this assessment, what would you do with the outcome? So we're going to next look at just a couple examples of what the output is if you choose to take something like this on and you actually land on an agreement across these different dimensions. So the way to interpret a more qualitative tool like the framework that we just looked at is in terms of this. Rather than coming up with a number and your readiness score is 85 out of 100, it's really meant to look at what are the greatest deltas that you have between different readiness dimensions, because depending on where you are across these dimensions, it creates very specific guidance for your path forward or challenges that you'll need to prepare for, or elements that you have to strengthen. So in the first example, this is an agency where they've already invested in data quality, the leadership is very strong. They have high leadership alignment where all the leaders are aligned. They have a shared vision for AI innovation, but the data is at the lowest level of readiness. So when you've got strong leadership intent with limited data, you're facing a feasibility constraint. In the next scenario, you have really strong data and technology, but let's pretend that your workforce hasn't had the ability to make time for training and workforce capacity is low. In that case, you would be looking at an adoption barrier. And so your preparation efforts would be focused on improving that adoption barrier. And in the last case, you've got a really strong workforce that's completed all the training and your data is in decent shape. You've got, active initiation when it comes to your technology, but there's no governance yet. That trend would point more towards risk exposure. And so even though our sector is really relatively new into AI adoption, we're already learning from the agencies that have been early adopters in this realm which areas you focus on first. And in general, you're always going to want to strengthen governance before you invest more in capacity building or data. Data quality, of course, can also be a blocker. So these are just some examples of how you would interpret these types of readiness results. Todd, I wanted to pause for just a moment because we've been through 10 slides. Are there any questions in the chat or any questions about this readiness framework before I move on?
That may be a prompt for those in our audience to ask questions, and they can do that through the Q&A. I haven't seen anything in the Q&A just yet, or somebody raise their hands. I will attempt to bring them off mute if I can do that. But so far, I haven't seen anything.
Okay. All right. Well, in that case, we'll keep going. And of course, there's a Q&A slide at the end. So because we're focused on that dimension of readiness that's specifically around workforce capacity, which of course, also involves your leadership, what are some of the impacts that AI is already having on skills and roles and competencies? So AI, some of these opportunities that we touched on with the why we're here slide is that AI is already reshaping possibilities, particularly for planners. We talked about its ability, and Kevin mentioned a study as well, where planners can, create digital twins. They can create these multitudes of equally plausible futures that you can literally wind tunnel different transportation options through to see how would this investment or this change, how would this play out across these different futures? So AI is giving, transportation planners the ability to do that. For engineers, thankfully, we have decided not to let the robots make decisions for us just yet. And AI offers amazing capabilities in the realm of QA, QC, where engineers can, do the work that they're trained to do, but then, use AI to check what they're observing. And then when it comes to policy and governance, this is a little bit funny and ironic, but you can use AI to help create AI policy and governance, which is the fox guarding the hen house. But the reality is policy and governance documents are hefty. And large language models give us the opportunity to look around at different agencies, look at their policies, look at their governance, synthesize it, and then use, of course, a private and secure tool that you have access to cherry pick the things that you would like to focus in on. So there's a lot of benefit that AI presents for people in our sector who work in the policy and governance realm. And based on those really exciting opportunities, these are some of the capabilities that are emerging in already existing jobs. Is AI literacy is growing, digital collaboration. Just in the last several years, a lot of us have gotten, especially since we ended up in virtual workforces where a lot of us work remotely, like me and a lot of us, digital collaboration, file sharing, and being able to have different editors in one document at the same time. Knowledge sharing has been transformed. AI governance itself is an emerging competency. Agile project management is another one that AI is driving forward. So failing fast, failing forward, failing quickly, and rapidly innovating, rapidly prototyping is another competency that AI has contributed to tremendously. But another moment to pause is that building any of these competencies is only possible when a really important issue has been addressed, which is addressing fear. So for another show of cartoon hands, I'd like to know how many of us have had careers long enough that we have potentially lived through the digital revolution and the internet revolution. Okay, we've got some seasoned workforce people on the call. So a lot of us remember how scared people were of the way that the internet would revolutionize jobs and the way that digitalization would revolutionize jobs and change things. And there was a tremendous amount of fear with those paradigm shifts. The fear that surrounds AI is much higher. When we touched on how popular artificial intelligence is in the news right now, so much of that news has been panic inducing and rooted in fear and all these risks around AI. So if you know that your organization is starting to lean into becoming more prepared, becoming more ready, it's really important to address fears head on. And the reality is, especially for the transportation sector, our sector, maybe one of our oldest challenges related to our workforce is workforce shortages. There's hardly an agency out there who ever feels like we have all the people we need to do the work that we've got to get done. So for our sector especially, AI is not poised for displacement. AI is instead poised to replace these burdensome skills that we wish that we've always needed help with, that truly will enhance people's jobs, enhance people's abilities, and truly will create some more free time and capacity to focus on more strategic tasks. So maybe for another show of hands, I'm curious, how many people work for an agency where people are expressing fear of AI? How widespread is the fear? Raise your hand if you work somewhere where you think that most of your colleagues have the perception that this is something that we want to avoid or stay away from because it still feels so risky. Wow. Okay. So there's some openness to it.
Yeah, I had my hand halfway up. I didn't know how to do that virtually, so.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Okay. Well then, if you work somewhere where that is a challenge, it's just part of your communication plan to be very clear that here's what AI will replace and what AI will not replace at your particular agency. So for the next few slides, we're going to look at, very straightforward, what are some action-oriented things that you can do to move forward on this pathway. We've already looked at that readiness model and that doing some type of readiness assessment would be that first step. But what is the roadmap after that? So once you go through some kind of a formal assessment of readiness, you know, within that model that we looked at, the two dimensions of readiness that were highlighted were your workforce and your leadership. So once you get a feel for where you are and where you have the largest deltas in readiness across those different dimensions and how to interpret that particular scenario that includes a mixture of risks and benefits for your organization, the next step is, of course, getting leadership aligned around, you know, your leadership team across departments and divisions has to have a shared vision of success and what that looks like. We, of course, mentioned that even if you have the funding and even if your data is in good shape, nothing can move forward without workforce capacity. So if you have a good assessment of your readiness, your leadership team is on the same page, you have workforce capacity, then you can go forward with increasing the readiness of the data that you choose to use maybe for your initial pilots. And the reason that the enhanced data quality and curation block is there in a corner with a long roadway in front of it is it takes a long time. When it comes to AI, it is no different than any other solution in terms of garbage in, garbage out. That will probably never change with technology. So for as smart as these AI solutions are, they still have to have high quality data sets to do these amazing things that they offer. So once you're at that point in the roadmap, there can be some miles ahead of you before you actually get close to initiating your very first pilots. And then, of course, once you do that, based on the outputs of you know, what are the results of your pilot, that informs your ability to scale. And then you, just like that readiness framework is very intuitive, most of these things follow a cycle. And at the end of this particular roadway, you would go back to doing another readiness assessment after you've gotten results from some initial pilots. And the reason that there are a couple circles with a little cartoon that has a megaphone is that I'm sure that in previous presentations, there's always a key component of transformation and change adoption. Communication is paramount to the success of any change. So going to be on this journey soon, the next few slides that we're going to look at is how would you communicate these types of decisions, these types of initiatives, these types of trainings. So we're going to look at a few tried and true communication models that you can use to promote AI readiness. So I'm especially curious about cartoon hands on this one. How many people have been exposed to the ADCAR model or honestly any change management model? ADCAR, Bridges, Cotter, there are dozens and dozens of them. I would love to see cartoon hands if you're familiar with change management communication models. Okay. All right. Well, the good news is that there's dozens and dozens of them. And I love the analogy that change management is a lot like Mexican food in the sense that there's all these different models and some of them have 5 steps and some have 10 and some have 3. But like Mexican food, it's a wrapper and some type of meat and some type of cheese and some type of sauce. All these models essentially say the same thing, which is don't surprise people, give them the why, train them adequately. And most change efforts tend not to fail during the excitement of a launch or the height of implementation. They tend to fail 6 months later when the fanfare is done and everybody goes back to doing things the way that they used to. So the success of most change management models is honestly in the reinforcement phase. So this is one model that you can use to drive change adoption of AI or honestly any other, you know, your organization is facing. I did select this one because it's one of the most popular ones, and the organization that owns this framework has engaged in some longitudinal research where they have sets that they've been building for more than 20 years that, you know, support through descriptive statistics the use of this model. Another one of the most popular models and one of the earliest change management communication models is Cotter's 8-step model. He's published some great books about communicating change. And you can imagine that in the last few years, because the momentum around AI has been so tremendous, most of these models now have alternate versions that have been created, specifically for AI. So starting with creating a sense of urgency, you can walk through the steps in this one and just get a feel for, this is a different approach to communicating change. So within that roadmap, these are some of the models that you can use to do communication. And another thing that we want to touch on is that when it comes to AI readiness, AI capacity, some of these skill building pathways can be beneficial for a bunch of different jobs. Whether a person is in human resources or engineering or planning, if one of the first places, depending on where your organization is at, if one of the first skills that you'd like to work on is digital and data literacy foundations, those can be applied to a multitude of really diverse jobs. And the training and the resources honestly look the same across different positions. So that's one example of a skill building pathway. Another one is automation. Um, as we touched on just a little, most of the tools that we already use as our standard platform for communication and information sharing, they have these, Power Automate is one example that Microsoft provides. There's a lot of automation that we can build into workflows that we have. And yeah, my goodness, when you first start to experiment with those, some of the benefits that automation, not even artificial intelligence, just good old fashioned automation, what that can do for organizational efficiency is pretty tremendous. And some more examples include agentic retrieval. When it comes to leveraging AI's capabilities, the lowest level of AI is agentic retrieval, where it's very safe from a security and privacy standpoint. You can essentially create an agent and give it access to an extremely small data set of very stable data. Let's use the example of just an employee handbook, something that doesn't change very often. And you can train an agent to answer simple questions about benefits, vacation, anything, any subject that's covered in that handbook. And you can build that exact type of very low level, very low risk agentic solution. You can do this for a bunch of different jobs and skill sets and departments. And it's one of the most sort of maybe fun and easy ways to get started in experimenting with AI. And then maybe one of the heavier lifts would be AI augmented data analysis. But this is just another example of a skill building pathway that you can leverage. So that leads us through the agenda, and no rabbit holes popped up. So at this point, we can just do some general Q&A, or if anybody has a comment or a question about what was shared, would love to. We can certainly go backwards and reopen one of the previous slides to dig into the details.
Thank you, Jessica. I am looking at the Q&A right now. So far, no entries there. I don't see anybody raise, or you can raise your hand. We'll try any number of things if you do have a question or something you'd like, or even a statement you'd like to make. Maybe it triggered a thought that you thought might be beneficial for the group based on some of your own experiences. A very quiet crowd today.
Yes, please. And if anybody's organization has started to play around with automation, or, their very first agent, I would love to learn if that's happening.
And Megan Kennedy did comment that she thought this is very helpful and said thank you. So I will acknowledge that.
Great.
Yeah, I think that if I could say in our organization, this, and I imagine many others of those who are on the call, we are certainly got groups or task force or whatever they're called within our companies trying to figure out how this fits within our confines. And I'll say I'm not. I'm missing an internal meeting today that I think they were talking about a little bit about that, but I know it's something that I need to learn more about personally. And I'm probably one of those seasoned people that you so politely put it. It's been through a lot of those changes and somewhat not afraid of the change, but somewhat guarded as well. So I'm trying to figure out how it fits in with my traditional routines I've had for many, many years.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly know a few people who are on the verge of retirement and they're like, get me out. I'm going to retire before I have to start building agents. But it's definitely on the horizon for all of us, even if we're in the early stages of assessing readiness. We have a lot of time left in the presentation, so
Yep.
if anybody would like to, we can go back and reopen the readiness framework if somebody would like to take a look at where their organization is. Kevin, thank goodness you've stepped in to save the day. What's your
Wow.
question, Kevin?
Well, one of the questions you mentioned, employee manual is one of the low-hanging fruit from an agentic type process. I've kind of heard, I don't know that it's true yet, but some agencies are beginning to use some AI programming to go through their uh, when we submit proposals to the agencies on different projects, that they're utilizing AI to go through those proposals to kind of pick out keywords, pick out key things that help them determine the validity, the best proposals of those things, to kind of help filter through those as as better products uh, to for that agency to look at. Don't know how true that is at this point, but I could see that as definitely being something that we would be looking at in the near future, if not already. What are your thoughts about that kind of thing? How easy would that kind of be to consider?
It, that one would be relatively easy and safe because it wouldn't require interaction with the World Wide Web. That could be a really constrained environment. The HR handbook example is real. That's definitely one of the first applications that agencies have taken on, again, because it's isolated, internal use only, and it's a very stable data set that only changes once every few years. So once you've trained a model, an agent to read the different sections and answer certain questions, and of course you also train it to not try to answer questions that it can't answer. Um, that's been successful. So the application that you just mentioned, Kevin, that's definitely happening. And a few of the very first projects that I've seen, the slide that had the use cases, those are very advanced use cases, most of which are being driven through partnerships with universities and research. But as far as independent attempts at experimenting with agents, in addition to using it for proposal reviews, there's been a few applications of using it for permit application reviews to check permit applications for compliance with certain requirements or data fields. Um, Another application that's out there is using it, yeah, for sentiment analysis or sort of first level support when it comes to engagement with the public. There's a couple agencies that have put agents on their external facing websites to answer a short list of frequently asked questions. That's another place that it's showing up. Kevin, is that a new question? Or is your hand, are you high fiving? Is your hand still raised?
No, I'm trying to find the dang audio button again. Well, here's a better question. In your opinion, what are your thoughts on the um, feasibility or the more um, adoption of these types of things 3, 5, 10 years out? I mean, what do you think this is going to look like, becoming much more prevalent in our world, not only from our transportation engineering and planning world, but from just general. Uh,
Yeah, that our sector is so regulatory driven. The answer for us might be tied more to regulations than anything else. There's probably some people on the call who work for consulting firms. That's a whole nother ball game. The timeline for private industry is already we're already a few clicks down a road that's rapidly evolving. But when it comes to a timeline for the public sector, it's interesting because at the local and state level, some um, government have come out and already issued a policy of do not touch this. We do not want any data having any interaction with any AI systems because we don't yet have our arms around the ethical and privacy implications. And other agencies, other governments have issued much more, very different and said that they're experimenting in these different ways. So there's probably huge regional differences in what the timeline looks like. And in some cases, maybe we're 2 years away from the first application, widespread applications. And in some cases, maybe it's 10 years, but probably very regulatory driven. It, I was wondering if anybody that's in attendance is involved with any of those use cases. If anybody's agency has already taken a step towards really leveraging that, would love to hear if anybody's involved in that research or some of those initial pilot studies.
Well, I can tell you on the one that we did in Chattanooga, where we were actually using AI to kind of help with the accident prediction model, that was primarily run by the university. We were providing police information. They had access to historical data plus a number of sensors and technologies that we had access to, all of which was anonymized through a variety of systems. We provided them completely just data points of this type of crash at this location at this time, and everything was scrubbed prior to providing them those data sets. So it was much more from the personal protected information perspective that we were protecting. So that was the big key for us at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that out of those use case examples that came from the USDOT's AI use case strategic alignment report, the one that was Tennessee, I think that was very much driven out of the University of Tennessee. So
Yeah, we
yeah.
were, and in Chattanooga, we looked at 4 levels of governance with regard to data. We had internal people that could see everything. We had internal people that could only see certain things. We had external people that could see most everything, and then external people that could only see limited things. So we had to figure out the different levels. There were people pockets within those levels. You know, so when you could share information and not share information through FOIAs and other activities that were, got kind of very process driven, and of course that's government. So
Understandable. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for those questions. You fill in the Q&A. And Todd, if there's nothing in the chat,
There
that's
actually
the end
is
of.
one. We just
Oh,
had
okay.
one. Justin Green has put something in the Q&A that says, I'll just reread it real right here. Our organization just started using AI for note-taking purposes during some of our internal meetings. Curious if others have used this, and if so, has it been beneficial? I will say that Demetra, if she may have stepped away, but she's been doing that, taking just little things like our committee meetings that we have for Southern District. She's been using that as a tool to help compile the meeting minutes, which is
I
I
can
know.
add to that. Thank you,
Yeah,
Todd.
yeah.
I am in the academia, so I'm professor at the Citadel, and since Zoom uh, added that feature, like the AI note taking and summary of the meeting, they have enabled it for everyone. So when you set up a Zoom meeting, you can select that, and by default is on. And it's been very helpful, especially for accountability purposes, like if you have a Zoom call or a meeting with students or other faculty, and then you want to refer back to, what was discussed, what are the responsibilities for each involved party. So it's been very helpful so far. And we are looking, at how we can add AI and how we can require students to get some AI knowledge before they go to the workforce. So there is a lot of discussion, and I think that AI is going to be used, like in companies, as Jessica mentioned, probably for the repetitive tasks initially, or maybe customer service, like the AI agents. But I think it's coming more and more now. We had recent discussions with Charleston Airport that they're looking into those tools, like managing safety and efficiency of transportation. So there is a lot coming, definitely.
Yeah, when it comes to note taking, I'm also in academia. We've started using it heavily there too. And actually, where Kevin and I work at KCI, we've also adopted it for that. And compared to just a couple of years ago, when we would do discovery sessions with agencies, sometimes 3 or 4 different people would take notes just to make sure that everything was captured. And then after the meeting, the group of people would compare notes and try to synthesize them. And that effort alone took hours that were added to the project, scope and budget. And now that we're using AI just for note taking, how good of a job it does with being able to listen to 10 or 12 different people go back and forth on topics, and the way that it accurately those topics and synthesizes them into very straightforward, very clean, accurate notes. Um, the example that was given in the chat of that being the very first use of AI, it's that's probably one of the thank you for bringing that up, because it's probably one of the most widespread initial uses. And oh my goodness, I love it. It's so extremely helpful to feel like you can just focus on the conversation, that the discussion is being transcribed accurately. So thank you for that comment in the chat. That's a great example. I hope other agencies, if that's the first and only application that you use for a little while, it's a great one to start with. Okay, well, Todd, if there's no other questions in the
Yeah.
chat, I will go ahead and end desktop sharing.
All right. Sounds great. Yeah, we appreciate you sharing with us again, Jessica. Great content today, and thank you for taking the time, both in preparation for sharing with us and today as well. Is very helpful to us all. We plan to make this recording available. I think I may have indicated that earlier, but we will make it available on the Southern District ITE YouTube channel. That information will be published eventually in a future edition of the Southern District Connector newsletter. That takes a while sometimes, so just be patient with us. We've got a backlog now of a couple of webinars that we haven't posted yet, so just be aware of that. If you're not a Southern District member, certainly would encourage you to join us. But if you're not and are not going to be joining us, but still would like access, just send me an email. It was in the chat earlier regarding PDHs, and I'll try to find a way to connect you up to the recording once it's available for you to look at. Just let you know, we'll be doing some other webinars like this throughout 2026. We are actively talking about those now. Just a couple of teasers. Some topics we're considering are what to do when Buc-ee's comes to town has been one that's thrown out. Career planning / time management / work-life balance. Those individually or all together, not sure which. And we will probably have at least one more, probably a couple, on the same topic of AI and transportation. We've had several in the series so far since we started December of 2024, I guess it was, when Kevin led off with one of those. So keep an eye out in the connector as always, and we'll try to get the word out about those plenty in advance so you can register. We appreciate all of you joining today, and we hope you have a great day. Take care, everybody. See you later.
Thank you.